different information. And as we go through it, something may pop into your head, so just type that question in and we'll make sure to cover that information for you. So what we're going to do today is we're going to present some information to you on closing costs and closing cost assistance. I'm going to show you a quick demonstration of Clearly Closing on how this software can help in relation to the topic that we're going to be covering today, and then we're going to answer all of your questions at the end. So without further ado, let's jump in here. Buyer's closing costs. You know, when buyers come to the table to purchase a home, they're normally aware of the fact that they have down payment to make, that they got to make a down payment. But what they're not usually aware of, or what kind of catches them by surprise, is that they have closing costs too. And quite frankly, sellers are surprised at this as well, about the buyer's closing costs. So knowing how to prepare and educate your clients can really help to bring the buyer and the seller together. What we'll cover today is, what are the buyer's closing costs? What all is included in that bucket of costs? Why should the seller consider paying any of the costs for the buyer? How much can the seller pay on behalf of the buyer? What are the limits there? The fee worksheet, which is really a must in negotiating closing costs for the buyer. And then finally, how do we document this agreement between the buyer and seller? So we're going to move through these different topics, and I'm going to jump in right now and turn it over to Mr. Roy West, who's going to tell us about what are the buyer's closing costs. Roy?
Well, I'm excited to be here, Andy. Thank you for this opportunity. And there it is right there on the screen. This is an example, and they come in a lot of different formats. This is a section of our fee worksheet that we do through Excel. We also generate one through other, so they can look different ways. But what you're really interested in as the realtor is, what are the lender fees? So whenever you're guiding a buyer and they're wanting to compare costs, which is a reasonable thing to do, you certainly want to make sure they understand what's really important when they're talking to that lender. And what's really important is, what are the lender's fees? Like you can see above the appraisal amount, the $650 appraisal amount, everything above that is, in our case, our lender fees, which is about $1,355. So that is what I control. Everything beyond that is other people's fees. And it's a pass-through cost. The lender can't add a dollar to it, so they don't, obviously. So just to be aware of that. So you want them to understand what the lender's costs are, because oftentimes people can lowball these other numbers, other sections of a fee worksheet, to give a lower amount of money that somebody's going to be bringing, which can be really deceptive and misleading if they get back to the point, well, look, our fees were correct. And under TRID, they do have a greater burden to be correct, but I see some from time to time that are obviously incorrect. So appraisal fees are going to be usually pretty similar throughout a geographic area. I know in Southeast Texas, ours are a little high because there's not that many appraisers in our markets. We've got a buyer's market right now, so there's a lot of appraisals that need to be done. Also, we have an estimate in there for what a survey cost is going to be, and that's a generic estimate that we use. And many times there's existing surveys, and those don't even have to be used. And we make the assumption that the owner's title policy is going to be paid for by the seller. This is a $200,000 purchase that we're looking at, putting down 20% just for simplicity's sake. And then also, what are closing costs? Those are your actual closing costs. Then you move into prepaids. So what's important about prepaids is, it is additional funds they're going to need to bring to closing. And oftentimes when people say, hey, I want to put down $20,000, they mean that's all they don't want to put a down payment of $20,000. They just want to put in the transaction $20,000. So the lender needs to understand that, but oftentimes the realtor needs to understand that too when they're writing up the contract. So in this case, we see that our insurance is rather high here because we're a coastal community and we're in windstorm. In Texas, obviously property taxes are a little bit higher than some states. When you see out-of-state lenders, many times those numbers are way low. I mean, I'll see $1,000 for hazard insurance, homeowners insurance, and I'll see, a number a good bit less, where they're only assuming maybe $2,000 or $1,500 in property taxes, which would be, would greatly reduce what they're going to be bringing, but it doesn't really, because once they get their insurance and taxes, they're going to find the true number. So those estimated closing costs and prepaids add up to right there. You see a subtotal. You see the down payment of $40,000. Then you see the closing costs, which include the $1,429, which is a little bit down the way there, is credited to the buyer because the seller's paying it, if the seller is paying the total owner's title policy. So in this case, they would need about $48,545. So that's an important, to be aware of, because sometimes when, if the buyer has a bad experience with their lender, it's going to sour the whole relationship. So oftentimes, it's certainly wise for people to get pre-qualified before they start looking, so that they know they can purchase what they're looking at. And then also get an idea, and certainly we do them all the time, get an estimate on a total fee, on a fee worksheet, in terms of what would the monthly payments look like and what would the cash to close look like. And it's going to vary because property taxes and insurance are going to change based on whichever house, but we're going to usually be pretty close. And I always try to estimate a little bit on the high side. I tell them that because nobody ever minds when numbers go down, but people always care when they go up. And I know from y'all's standpoint, when that happens, oftentimes I'll get involved when something goes sideways, and it creates a burden for the realtor. So I think, realtors often say, I don't want to get into the financing, and I certainly understand that you don't need to, but you do need to make sure that your customer understands what they're happening, because if not, it could end up certainly affecting the transaction.
Excellent. Thank you, Roy. I like how you mentioned how when you do the estimates, you like to estimate it even a little bit high. That's actually a very good idea. Buyers never mind if their fees are a little bit less, but if they're higher, then you certainly have a problem. So the next, let's talk about why should the seller consider paying some of those fees that we just discussed. What's in it for the seller? Well, there's actually a few compelling reasons for you to talk to your seller about whenever you are listing their home and negotiating contracts. The first is that many buyers need that assistance in order to make the deal work. There's many locations around our state where, especially for first-time home buyers, they need that assistance, and it's going to actually open up the property, expose the property to a wider range of buyers for the seller. The money that the seller pays on behalf of the buyer can often be made up for in the sales price. So for instance, if the seller is paying, let's say $5,000 closing costs on behalf of the buyer, maybe we can negotiate a sales price that's $5,000 higher than they were willing to accept. So in essence, the seller's net can end up where they wanted it to end up, and then the buyer gets what they want too. So we often think that it's just the buyer, that's getting the main benefit. Well, the seller being open to these closing costs actually helps them to get the property sold. It's very important that you explain this to the seller in the beginning before they ever get an offer, because if you get an offer and the buyer's asking for closing cost assistance, it's a little bit harder to explain it to the seller at that time. So go over this information with the seller before you list the property. One other quick note. A seller cannot give the money under the table to a buyer. It's a RESPA violation, Real Estate Settlement Procedures Act violation. So sometimes you have a seller say, look, I'll just give them $1,000 at closing. Now you can't do that. You have the money that's given on to the buyer has to be documented within the contract or in any amendments to the contract and approved by the underwriter. So just make sure that any assistance that the seller gives to the buyer is taken care of in the contract. Roy, why don't you talk to us now about what are the limits on how much the buyer can request?
Well, you have a handy slide there to help everybody see. There are limits, and on conventional loans, unless people are putting down 10 or more percent, you're going to be limited to 3%. Once they put down 10%, they can ask for and get up to 6% seller concessions if the seller is so willing. On FHA, it's 6%. On VA, generally, it really works out to about 6%, 4% plus the unallowables. And then also on USDA up to 6% of the sales price. So what becomes really important in this, and that's, again, where you need a good lender, and, you want to partner with somebody that you're familiar with, that you can reach out to, And I have realtors that reach out to me even when it's not my deal, just to look at it if something feels a little fishy to them. And I'm happy to do it because it's all about relationships. And for you to be the best realtor you can for your customer, it's always good for them to sit down with a lender beforehand so that they can see the numbers. We were talking about closing costs earlier, and one of the things we'll certainly, as a lender, I'll talk to people about is they say, well, I've got this amount of money. I mean, sometimes people are doing an FHA loan, all they can bring is their 3.5%. They don't have any more money. So, and we certainly go over gift options and all that from family members, but when seller concessions are the only option, you want to make sure that you're getting the right amount in seller concessions and not too much. And the reason I say that is I know around here, you start getting above 150, 140, you're really not going to need 6% in seller concessions in most instances. You get up to 250, you're probably not going to need any more than 4%. And so getting the right amount, because if you negotiate for more than you need, the seller is going to get to keep it. The buyer doesn't get benefit of it, and buyers can get upset when all the money's not used. It can be used to buy down discount points. So if you get 6%, but I don't know that that's necessarily the best use of it, but that's an individual choice. But I would say make sure that they're working with a lender that can help them understand how much money they do need to bring and or get in seller concessions. And that would be my recommendation. And you got a great
tip there. Yeah, Roy, I'll mention here too that in addition to these fees that Roy just talked about, the seller can also pay for the owner's title policy and the property survey above and beyond the loan assistance cap. So there's actually some additional money that can be paid for on behalf of the buyer by the seller. But like Roy mentioned, just make sure you don't ask for too much money, and we'll talk about that a little bit more here in a minute. So let's talk about this fee worksheet. What Roy showed you a little while ago, or what we showed you on the screen as far as the buyer's closing costs, prepaids, and total cash to close, that's a portion of the fee worksheet. And that's actually the lion's share of the fee worksheet. There's a little more information on it too, which I'll show you. But the important thing here is that the fee worksheet outlines all of the buyer's anticipated costs and their monthly payment, okay? So it's not only all of those fees they have to pay, it's what is their payment gonna be? It's really a must to get this before you make an offer for the reasons that Roy expressed, and I'll express again that in order to properly negotiate on behalf of a buyer, they need to know how much they have to bring. They need to know if they have enough money. They need to know how much their note is going to be. All too often it can happen where a buyer gets involved in a transaction only to find out that they weren't aware of the amount of money they were going to have, and then we have to renegotiate things in the middle of the deal. Much more challenging. Much better to put the horse before the cart and know exactly what the buyer needs. Then we can negotiate for them properly as we negotiate with the seller. So going back to a fee worksheet here, these three sections are what Roy had already covered, and it covers all of their closing costs, all of their prepaids, and their total amount cash to close. That is a very important figure right there. Their total cash to close, that's their down payment plus all of those costs. That's the first figure they need. The next figure they need is what is their total payment going to be? That's their P&I, their hazard insurance, and their taxes, and maybe even their mortgage insurance if they put down less than 20%. So those two figures right there, cash to close and total payment, are what's going to be included on that fee worksheet, and then the buyer can comfortably move forward at that time. And I'll tell you this, from a negotiating standpoint, when the buyer knows what they have to have in order to purchase the home, they're going to be much more likely to make an offer. It's going to remove that hesitation. So from strictly a negotiating standpoint and helping a buyer to move forward, this fee worksheet can really work to your advantage in getting that buyer to the table to make an offer. So now let's talk about I'm sorry, one more tip here to mention to you. Have the buyer actually get a fee worksheet right away with a house that roughly meets the criteria. What I mean by that is when you first start working with a buyer, you're going to know about what they're looking for. You're going to know within, $10, $20, $30,000 or so, the price range home they're going to be looking for and the area they're going to be looking for. Pick a house out that meets that rough criteria, get a fee worksheet from your preferred lender, on that information, and then you'll know when, let's say you're showing them houses on the weekend and you don't have a lender handy, you've already got that information. So that's a real good tip for you to help out your buyer. Now, what about documenting the agreement? How do we document what the agreement is between the buyer and seller? Paragraph 12, as a lot of you may already know, is paragraph 12A1A is where we put the amount of closing costs that the seller is going to pay on behalf of the buyer. That's the figure that goes in that blank there. Now, once we execute a contract, once we sign a contract and have an agreement, sometimes the closing cost amount can change. For instance, if when the buyer has inspections done on the property, if the seller may not want to do the repair, but they may want to give them some money in lieu of doing that repair. Well, you can change the closing cost amount that was originally agreed upon on the amendment here in paragraph 4. The amount of paragraph 12A is changed to, and then you put that amount there. Roy, tell us real quickly about why it's important for when this is done. Why is this important for this information to get to the lender?
Well, it has happened on more than one occasion, and we attempt to have checks and balances to keep this from happening. But oftentimes buyers they've got a lot on their mind, and realtors can certainly get a lot going on, and it can be from lack of experience, or it can be just too much going on. And I know I've been doing this business a long time, but if we didn't have our checks and if we didn't have our check lists to go through, things could get missed. And getting the amendments when they're done to your lender and the title company are really important. And believe me, it happens that sometimes they get them done and either side remembers to send them to the title company or to the lender. And certainly it's the buyer's agent's primary responsibility to get it to the title company and certainly to the lender. But even as a listing agent, you can certainly forward it on to the title company and say, please forward the lender. Most title companies would be happy to do that, and it can prevent any future problems, because if you're at closing and you find out, which I've had happen before, if we've got to send it back to underwriting, there's a lot of hoops to jump through. It doesn't mean you can't get closed that same day, but it doesn't mean, it depends on how much there is of a change with the TRIB rules in terms of whether you're able to do that. And certainly it is, we ask, and sometimes we've asked and not been told, and it's actually had those changes. So that's an important thing to make sure that everything's being communicated, because communication is certainly the key for all of us in a transaction. I know I'm building, I'm hoping for referrals from any of the buyers that we work with, and I know y'all are as well as realtors. And the reason they do that is they have a good experience, and they feel like, man, I hear these nightmare stories, and yet I always knew what was going on, and there wasn't ever any surprises. So, that's, again, why I'm going to recommend to you to certainly work with a local lender, or work with a lender that you're comfortable with. I'm certainly happy to work with anybody in Texas, but, it's be able to reach out, call them on the weekend, text them on the weekend or in the evenings, ask them questions to be able to help you in your transaction. Because I don't know everything I need to know about real estate for sure, but I know lending, and the real estate side. So it's important to find people that you can partner with, that you can take care of, because it's going to make you a much better agent, and it's going to make you look better with your customers.
Exactly right. Thank you, Roy. I appreciate that. And just to circle back around to one more point that Roy mentioned earlier, don't ask for more assistance than the buyer needs, because they're not going to get it back. So if you ask for $10,000 closing cost assistance, they get to the closing table and they only have $8,000 in closing costs, that $2,000 goes to the seller's benefit. The buyer's not going to get it in any other way. Another reason to have a fee worksheet, to make sure you're not asking for too much money. So it's our duty as real estate professionals to advise and negotiate on behalf of our clients, looking out for their best interests. Part of this is education and preparation. That is a huge part of our job. That's a big part of what we do, like explaining all of the information that we just covered in this webinar. Clearly Closing is software that helps you to do that, and let me show you how. Clearly Closing is a cloud-based software as a service program accessible from your smartphone, your computer, your laptop, that helps you manage your contacts, your listings, your leads, and all of your contracts. So here I've got the home screen, and if I were to click on a buyer transaction here, it opens up the transaction window for this buyer, and it allows us to invite the buyer into the Clearly Closing system. Now, what are they going to see when we invite them in? If I click on this Getting Started button, this is information that the buyer needs to know prior to making an offer, including how much is this going to cost me? Here's the closing cost information that we just covered. What if I need help with my closing costs? Here's some of the regulations regarding how much closing cost assistance that they can ask for. So you see the information is already built into the program, allowing you to share it with your client very easily. If we look on the seller side, remember there's information that we have to share with the seller too. So if we go over to the seller side, very similarly, if I go to Getting Started, there is a section here, will a buyer ask me to pay some of their fees? And yes, here's a section that allows you and reminds you to explain this information to the seller. Remember, we can more easily put deals together and negotiate deals when our clients are fully informed on the information that they need to know. Also, Roy mentioned the importance of getting that amendment to the lender and to the title company whenever we have a contract change. There's agent checklists built into the system that remind you to do little tasks just like that. Here's a checklist for your buyer, provide amendment to the title company and the lender. It's already in here. You'll get a text reminder to do all of these things for your client. Roy, if you don't mind, say a couple of words about how information like this, when the agent shares it with the buyer, how that can help you as a lender.
Well, as I was talking about before, Andy, one reason I love this Clearly Closing product for realtors is everybody being on the same page. I know for one thing, I don't ever want to make anybody look bad, and I certainly try hard not to. However, if incorrect information is given from a realtor about a lending situation, distrust immediately occurs. You know, people, there's surprises that they don't like. This helps you stay right focused on where you need to be in the transaction, and you have the checklist so that if you get busy, and certainly in busy days, you know you can be answering calls and texts all day long, and you might have had your to-do list and it got flipped over and you started writing new notes on it and you didn't think about what you need to do. Well, with Clearly Closing, you're going to get reminded, and until those boxes get checked, you're going to know that you need to take care of them. So if it slips by you in a day, it's not going to, because you're going to catch it the next time. So I think it's a great product. It's going to make you a better realtor, and in it, you're going to serve your customers so much better, and that's going to get you more business and more referrals, because they're going to have an outstanding customer experience, and when they have that, they come back to you, and that's what we all strive to do.
Excellent. Thank you, Roy. I appreciate you saying that. And Clearly Closing has so many more different features for you to be aware of. Here's a little timeline snapshot for you to keep up with all the dates for every one of your transactions. And it's got a contact management system built into it too. So Clearly Closing, what I'm going to ask is that you go to champions.clearlyclosing.com, champions.clearlyclosing.com, and you can learn more information about the program. It's built specifically for Texas real estate agents around the Texas real estate contract details, and it's the only program out there like that does this. You can sign up for a free 7-day trial there too and see the features. When you order it through this webinar, it's only $120 for a 16-month subscription. Really an incredible value. It can literally pay for itself in one transaction in the way that you can help put a deal together, make sure it's reminding you of things that you need to do. So $120 for a 16-month subscription. Walks you and your client through each step from contract to closing, sends you alerts about your contract timeline details, and the software and the data is yours no matter where you work. So if you work for a broker that provides you with a software program, just know if you ever leave that broker, you may have to leave that information and that software there. Clearly Closing, take it with you wherever you like, wherever you want to go. So with that, I'm going to open up the floor to any questions. So if any of you have any questions out there about any of the information that we've covered today in regards to closing cost assistance, take just a minute and type it in there, and I'll be happy to answer it, or any questions about Clearly Closing. So I'll wait and see if we have any questions. Don't see any just yet. So While I'm waiting for that, see if anybody has questions, let me just remind you of our next webinar that's coming up on how to use the TREC amendment to contract. Whenever we execute a contract between a buyer and seller, oftentimes we have to go back and amend that contract and change something, either change the sales price or the closing cost assistance or the closing date. And there's some specific rules and guidelines and strategies, I should say, for using the TREC amendment to contract. So that'll be on Thursday, October 13th from 1 to 1:30. And you'll be getting an invitation, and we ask you to share that invitation with your broker and with any other agent. I want to thank Roy from Guild Mortgage for participating today. If y'all have any questions, feel free to email him. There is his email address. He says you can even call him if you like or text him. His information is right there. Roy is an excellent resource out there for you to reach out to and answer any questions and help you with any loans that you need out there. So Roy, thank you for participating today.
Well, thank you, Andy. It's been my pleasure.
Okay, you bet. Still don't see any questions, so let me just let you know that if you have any questions out there after the webinar, feel free to email me at andy@clearlyclosing.com, and be sure to go to champions.clearlyclosing.com and sign up for your free trial of the software and see what it can do for your business and helping you manage your transactions and better educate all your buyers and sellers. So thank y'all very much for participating today. I appreciate you tuning in, and I wish you all the best in the remainder of the week, and hope y'all sell lots of houses out there. And if you're still in school in Champions, keep studying hard, pass that test, and we look forward to seeing you in the field. Y'all take care, and look forward to seeing you at the next webinar.